So I was skeptical about the union at first. I met with the first couple of organizers came by. I was actually, I think at the time, Associate Dean for Humanities, and they sort of pitched the union to me. And when I asked about who was going to be in the bargaining unit, they actually ended up suggesting that it would be both non-tenure track and tenure track faculty. And I was thinking, oh, that probably won't work. Not enough common interests and so forth. How would it be? Because there are more non-tenure track faculty than tenure track faculty and so on. So I was pretty skeptical about it. Time passed, and things at the university actually began to change a bit. There was sort of pressure from my perspective on faculty governance. There was first there was a change in leadership, and then there was the sort of call for faculty to get more involved in how the university was run and so forth, and I thought that was a good idea. And in fact, for a long time, I thought that the faculty ought to be more involved in the administration of the university. Originally, of course, faculties were the university, and they hired administrators to sort of do daily functions, but eventually they stepped away from things like deciding on academic policy in a sort of robust way, or admission standards and so forth, and sort of went about their business as teachers and researchers and so on. University of Oregon is actually a really good example of a place where the faculty really stepped back, and that became apparent to me when I was asked by, I think it was President LaRiviere, to be on the Constitution Committee, because the Constitution of the university had been called into question by the Department of Justice in the state, because they weren't sure that it properly defined the governing body as what they now call the statutory faculty. And so I was involved in the process of putting together the new Constitution, which was really interesting, and in that context became worried about the ways in which faculty had come to be involved in governance. So it was in that context the first organizers came around, and I thought it wasn't a really good sort of fit to have both NTT and tenure track faculty in. But at some point along the way, I decided that that was a cost, that sort of a price that had to be paid for a stronger share in governance. And so it was, I think this was the fall of the year before the card drop happened, and I was invited to speak to a university senate meeting. I went to the senate meeting and I talked about faculty governance and so on, and then somebody asked a question about exactly the issue that I'd been worried about, non-tenure track faculty and tenure track faculty. And in the context of talking about it with the Senate, it became pretty clear that I'd kind of been just wrong about this. The ability of tenure track faculty to do what they do depends on a kind of ecosystem of faculty that include people who do what non-tenure track faculty do. And that unless the faculty as a whole stood together, we wouldn't do two things. We wouldn't have a share in shared governance, the sort that we needed, but we also wouldn't be able to carry out our academic function the way we needed to. It was essential that sort of all the faculty, not just the tenure track faculty, be involved. And really from that point on, I was pretty convinced that we had something right about the way bargaining units ought to be structured. So, you know, things continued. The firing of LaRiviere motivated the faculty in really extraordinary ways, in a sense, and a lot of people decided the union was sort of the proper response to that sort of lack of shared governance that came when the president was fired, and so the union came in. The card drop was successful, and it was successful, interestingly, in that there was a majority of non-tenure track faculty voted for the union, but a majority of the tenure track faculty also voted for the union. And sort of the fear that everything would be decided by non-tenure track faculty looked as though it probably wasn't going to come to pass. And then the experience actually in the following years was that in fact there's great cooperation between tenure track and non-tenure track faculty, just in the way it ought to be, because we're all parts of the same faculty. We're all essential to the function of the university, and so it's important that we not only cooperate, but actually advocate for each other in the process. And I think that's pretty much the way the union has been since it started. I got drafted onto the bargaining team sort of by degrees. It was one of those, you know, sitting in bath water as it slowly heats, and the next thing you know, it's really hot. I hadn't sort of expected that I would end up being part of the bargaining team, but I was, and the bargaining team was probably one of the best experiences I've had in academe since I started. There were 9 of us. We were from different parts of the university, but remarkably united about a vision of what we wanted to accomplish in that first contract. And just sort of fun, interesting, easy to get along with people. And so we ended up spending a lot of time together. But probably the most impressive thing was this is a first contract, right? So we wrote the whole contract. And I should say, actually, Dave Cecil did most of the writing. And then we did the editing, and some of us the editing of commas and grammar and so forth. I wasn't one of those. But because the administration really never proposed comprehensive articles, they really were responsive to what we wrote, we ended up doing most of the primary drafting of what now are most of the policies that govern faculty work at the university. And faculty work means the academic side of things. It was an extraordinary experience, actually, that sitting there together, the group of 9 of us could say, you know, well, this is our experiences. What are we going to do about it? What are the problems that we face? And then turning them into contract language that ultimately was going to, and in fact now is, addressing those very problems. So it turned out to be a great experience. Of course, bargaining was another experience. So we wrote all this stuff, and then there was the bargaining process itself, which on certain days was just miserable, and on other days was actually kind of fun. I think in the end there was a kind of camaraderie that developed as a result of the shared, I don't know, pain of bargaining that you know, I think we all still appreciate. But in the end, I think you know, there was a fair amount of resistance at certain points from the administration. I think that some of the administration team probably recognized that what we were up to was a good thing. One of the things that the university was criticized for in the last accreditation review before the union began was a stunning lack of policies and policy processes. That is, how do you get policies established? The union contract ended up establishing policies that had been, you know, in people's memories, sometimes written down, sometimes not written down, and we systematized a ton of the policies that the university had and gave a process for continuing to do that. And there were administrators who were like, finally, we have rules, right? So the result of the negotiations was a pretty extraordinary process of writing policy, of thinking about the university's mission as an educational and research university, and also as a way of bringing the faculty and, surprisingly, the administration together around that mission. So it was a truly remarkable experience. When it was done and everything was signed and we had this vision of what the faculty would look like, it became apparent within days that we were so far from the picture that the contract painted that we had to establish what we called at the time an implementation team, implementation committee, and I was fortunately, I guess, invited to be part of that along with some administrators. And our job was to take this vision document that the CBA turned out to be, because it talked about the way that faculty would interact, how they would be reviewed, and so forth, and we had none of the infrastructure that would make that possible, or not much of it. Right down to the ability to reclassify people who had been adjunct professors into career positions, right? This is something that was key to the whole process, and this had to be accomplished because it wasn't the case that everyone was already in the right position. Hundreds of people weren't. So the implementation team had to start from the collective bargaining agreement and envision a way to move from there to kind of an operating university that had all these pieces in place. And that was itself a kind of fascinating experience. One of the first things we did was work through the conversion process of taking hundreds of adjunct positions that had been adjunct positions, you know, sometimes forever, and convert them into career tenure track positions that then were eligible for annual reviews and promotions and regular salary increases and so on. It was an enormous task, and most of it truly fell to the academic affairs office, to the senior vice provost there, Barbara Altman at the time, and she had to work with all these departments to organize this process and then actually sort of have the paperwork work and everyone sort of taken into account, and then the promotion, the conversions of positions made, and then the promotion processes started. It was a huge amount of work. No one had any idea that this was going to happen when we signed the collective bargaining agreement. Neither the administration nor the union, but everyone stepped up to the challenge, and we spent, well, I mean, we're still in that period in a sense, right? Two years going on 3 years of trying to implement all the stuff that we had envisioned around the bargaining table the first time around. And I think we've made immense progress on this. Regularizing the non-tenure track ranks, for example, there were in most departments no documents that said what they were supposed to do in their jobs. So coming up with professional responsibilities and a review process and all of this was a huge amount of effort, but in the end it was accomplished, and it wasn't just the faculty stepping up, it was also administrators, department heads, and so forth. So ultimately the collective bargaining agreement led to, and this is its real success, a transformation of the university. So the changes that unionization has meant for the university, the first one, of course, is just the thing I was just talking about, regularizing stuff, having policies, being able to go to a website and call up a policy and see its history, what its status was, and so forth. These are things we couldn't do before unionization, and maybe in some other world we would have come up with these eventually, but unionization really grabbed hold of the university and sort of drug it into the present, where the policies were in place and so on. So regularizing all of this stuff, policies and so forth, is a huge thing. The second thing, though, I think is and probably the most important result of unionization here, is the regularizing and recognition of non-tenure track faculty as part of the faculty. The very thing that I was sort of worried about initially turns out, in retrospect, to be the most important thing. Faculty, non-tenure track faculty, are the teaching core of the university. Without them, we don't do what we do. And this is true at every research university. Every research university has massively increased the adjunct or the non-tenure track ranks. And at most places they've done nothing to regularize them. They still work term to term in many cases. Their pay is low. They don't have opportunities for promotion or review. They don't have a say in governance of departments or the university. All of that's changed here. The university, I'm sure, has a lot of problems in lots of ways around how faculty are treated and so forth, and those are getting addressed, but the basic move of treating non-tenure track faculty as faculty is the most important thing that the collective bargaining agreement did, and we've seen results already, right? I mean, people have been able to get promotions, they've been able to get longer contracts, they've been able to get regular reviews. Merit reviews and merit raises were unheard of in many parts of the university before unionization. So all at once, non-tenure track faculty become part of the faculty in a real way, and that's a huge transformation, and is the way sort of universities in the future if they're going to survive. The third thing is the issue of shared governance. So when I was on the Constitution Committee, one of the things that was stressed regularly was that the Constitution, though the President would sign it, it was really at the discretion of the President. There's no sort of binding structure around the Constitution. It was binding on the faculty in a sense, and it was a recommendation to the President. The collective bargaining agreement, though it doesn't specifically mention the Constitution, clearly adopts aspects of the Constitution and who gets to count as faculty and so forth, and further, thanks to the past practices rule, suggests, in fact, that the Constitution and the structures of the Senate are actually binding as well. I'm not sure everyone in the administration would agree to that, but interestingly, very few people would question it. Right? I mean, at this point, the University Senate is viewed as the governing body of the faculty of the university, and I think it is shored up or supported or somehow a consequence of the fact that the faculty now have power through the collective bargaining agreement. And as a result of that, the faculty senate, or the University Senate, is in a position to actually have authority. And the presidents so far have respected it, and no one's challenged it. Mainly they've recognized that it needs to be worked with, and they've worked very hard to come up with good policy formation processes and so on using the University Senate. When we did the collective bargaining agreement, we were very careful to not make the bargaining agreement cover things that were properly the University Senate's responsibility. We believe the University Senate should do what it does. Collective bargaining agreement should do what it does and provide a kind of underpinning for faculty authority. And I think we were successful in that. And so one of the reasons that so many faculty joined the union all at once was the issue of shared governance, of administration listening to the faculty. And I think that now, through the collective bargaining agreement, we have a real University Senate structure that is really being listened to, and I think the faculty are back in a position to actually do shared governance. The caveat is that the faculty, in large measure, had forgotten how to do shared governance. And so part of what we're doing now is learning how to do that as faculty. And that's meant that's caused a lot of frustration at certain points, slowness in the process, the need to renovate processes that had been in place for a while, change committee structures and so on. But that's all right. I mean, that's part of the process. And I think the faculty have taken on the responsibility, taken it seriously, and are now learning how to be participants in shared governance in a way that they had never been before. I think that the University of Oregon has, because of what we've accomplished here, really set the bar for how research universities are going to have to be in the future. Not all research universities recognize this yet. There are only a handful that are unionized in the way that we are. But I think that with time, this is going to change. And it's going to change because universities have for 30 years been driven by a kind of corporate model. Businesses have been playing a very important part in funding universities and talking about what kind of product they should produce and so forth. And that corporate model has really come to dominate not just the administrative side, but also the academic side of the university. History of the United States reminds us that when you have corporatization, the best response, and sometimes the only response, is unionization, right? That's the way that the balance is maintained. Since corporatization has sort of undermined traditional ways of shared governance, unionization provides the only way of sort of seeing the counterbalance in the future. Right? The balance between a kind of corporate-directed university and a unionized faculty means that there's the chance that universities will continue to grow and do the work that they need to do for society. Without that organized faculty, I think that we lose that. We are no longer working for the society as a whole, we're working for a sector of it. But unionization and the presence of the faculty and the kinds of things that concern them and their concern for students and the students' education means that those concerns are also at the table. So it's not just a question of what part of society wants from a university, it's now a question of how the whole society wants universities to be. And I think the University of Oregon has shown what that can look like. We're not perfect yet, we've got a long way to go, but the CBA has given us the resources to be that kind of transformative university. That doesn't mean that old old school union issues about sort of working conditions and so forth aren't important. They are. But having the kind of bargaining unit we have makes the issues more than just the sort of limited ones about how work gets done. Because we also have to cooperate. Non-tenure track faculty, tenure track faculty, researchers all have to talk to each other about what makes it possible for their work to get done. And that means it's more than just sort of the local problem in a particular unit. It's a problem that has to be negotiated across the whole of the faculty. And that's what makes not only this union powerful, but it also makes it part of this conversion of the university to something new, a kind of new model university. And so the hope for the future is that more universities are able to make this sort of transition, because I think that public higher education is at risk in the United States, partly because of the lack of public investment, and partly because it has lost its focus on the needs of society as a whole. And I think that the unionization process is a way of reinforcing that larger mission so that public universities can continue to do the work that they were set to do in the first place. When public universities started, it was to serve the society. It was to produce new knowledge that could be used by everybody. It was to provide training for people so everyone had opportunities to excel, to achieve, to think about things they hadn't thought about before. the trajectory of the universities has made that less and less the mission, and I think unionization is one of the ways of calling the university back to that kind of mission. And I think at University of Oregon we've really done a good job of starting that. There's a lot of work to do. We're not done, and we won't be done after this contract or the next contract. But with each contract, more stuff gets reorganized in ways that contribute to this sort of vision of the university. So it's really an exciting time to be at the university. I should probably say one thing about the fact that while I was an organizer for the university and a member of the bargaining team, I'm also now a dean of the graduate school. And I'm one of, I think, 3 people who were on the original bargaining team who are now in upper administration positions. I think it's to the credit of the university that they would take people who were organizers of the union first seriously for these sorts of roles. But I also think it's a recognition of the kind of union we have, that we're not bound to the sort of traditional roles of labor versus management. We see, I think, and I think my colleagues who are now in the administration would agree, that we see the mission as a university mission that's got to be aided by good people in the faculty, good people in the administration, good people in staff positions, and so on. We all have to work toward that vision. So it's not a weird thing to move from the union to the administration. And in a lot of ways, we're still doing the same work. We're just using different resources to do it. And so, as I said before, this is an exciting time to be at the University of Oregon. And one of the reasons, maybe the central reason in a lot of ways, is that United Academics has become part of what it is to be at the University of Oregon and to do the work that we do. So I appreciate the chance to lecture the camera. Thank you.